If you're eyeing up the 24-inch M1 iMac, you're probably stuck between 8 and 16 gig of RAM. Today, I'm going to help you make that decision. Welcome back to Ellis Reviews, and thank you as always for subscribing if you have. If you haven't subscribed, the button is just down there somewhere. Also, a very exciting announcement, I'm now on Patreon, so if you want to support this channel, there's no obligation to do that whatsoever, it's entirely up to you. But if you do get some pretty cool additional content and stuff, and you also get access to my brilliant Discord server. And this is something I've been building over the last 6 months. I say I've been building it, it's actually the members that have been building it. So if you want access to that community, and if you want to get some cool additional content as well, head over to the Patreon link in my description. And a very, very quick thank you to my first ever patron, who is Andy. Thank you, Andy. Since I started covering Apple's M1 chip back in November, December last year, whenever it was, there's one question that I've got time and time again, right up to this day, right up to this morning before I started filming this video. And it is, should I get 8GB or 16GB of RAM? Will 8GB be enough? Will 16GB be a better investment? Will 8GB cause problems with the SSD? Will I get more money in the future for the 16GB version? The questions go on and on and on, and I completely understand why, because Apple doesn't really cover this at all. Now, there's lots of other buying decisions that you need to make with the 24-inch iMac. I'll get onto those in future videos, although I will leave a link in the description to my full review of it as well, which kind of covers some of those points. But this video is completely based on the RAM question, whether or not you should go for 8GB or 16GB. And I'm going to look at two use cases. One of them is a home user and the other one is a business user. Before I get into this, I just wanted to kind of qualify myself for being able to answer this question for you. And straight up, I'm not massively deeply techie and geeky. I am a bit of a nerd, but I don't get into benchmarks. I've always mentioned that in the past on this channel. And I don't deep dive into specs, but I understand how this stuff works, and I've been using computers my entire life. I've invested an awful lot of time in the Mac ecosystem. And more importantly, when it comes to the M1, I have been using both the 8GB and 16GB version daily all year. So every single day I'll start my day using my M1 MacBook Air, which has the complete base spec 8GB version. I'll then sometimes switch to my M1 Mac Mini behind me, which is spec'd up to 16 gig. Then I might switch to the 8GB version of the M1 in the iMac. So I'm always going between these two setups. I've also answered literally hundreds of comments on these videos from people who have asked whether they should go for the 8GB or 16GB version. I've listened to their stories as well, so I'm going to put all of that experience together and help you pick the right version of the 24-inch M1 iMac based on the RAM. The first piece of advice is really simple. If you can afford the $200/£200 upgrade to the 16GB in the M1 24-inch iMac, do it. Trust me, there is nothing worse than buyer's remorse. That is something I've had myself. I think we've all had it at some stage. We've all bought something and thought, I should have spent a bit more and bought the next version up. And I could sit here and ramble on about the 16GB versus 8GB thing and SSD wear and all that stuff. If you are in any way nervous about getting that 8GB version and you can afford that £200, $200 upgrade to 16 gig, just go for it. In doing so, you'll get the maximum amount of headroom from that processor. So the maximum amount of RAM you can get, you can't go any more than that. You'll potentially get more longevity from it. So as macOS develops and as apps develop and need more RAM potentially in the future, you know that you've got the maximum amount of RAM that you could have got in the first place. And more importantly, you'll just get that nice, warm, fuzzy feeling inside that you've bought the computer that you deep down you really wanted. So if money isn't the issue, just get the 16 gig. Now, if money is an issue, or you really have to justify spending that additional £200, $200, which I totally understand, it's not an inconsequential amount of money, it's a lot of money. All you need to do is think about your use case. And this is where we kind of differentiate two types of users. So the first one is just what I would call a normal home user. And that's someone who uses it for email, FaceTime, maybe a bit of writing here and there, PowerPoint presentations, doing your homework. If that's you, the 8GB version is brilliant. Don't forget that in front of me now, I have the complete base spec, the cheapest 24-inch iMac you can buy, and I run my business from it. And no, I don't do all of my video editing on it. That's all done on the 16 gig Mac Mini behind me, but everything else works perfectly on this 24-inch iMac. I never, at no point throughout the day does it ever sweat. It never kind of slows down or suggests that I'm trying to make it do too much. It's just brilliant. The only thing to bear in mind with 8 gig is that a bit further down the line, it may start to tire a little bit. It may start to get a bit slower, a bit sluggish. Like I mentioned a moment ago, as macOS develops and as apps become a little bit more RAM hungry, potentially, it might wear a little bit quicker than the 16 gig version. But I still think even that, if you're just doing basic, normal kind of computery stuff on it, I don't think you're going to notice that. You're still going to get at least 3, 4, maybe more years out of it. I would even say this is the case if you occasionally dabble in some more creative type work. So occasionally if you do a bit of music production here and there, or a bit of video editing, or you dabble in a bit of programming, the 8GB version will still be fine. It will work. If it's not your job, if you don't have to get things out the door on time and you're doing really intensive, really hardcore 4K, 8K editing, in which case you're probably not watching this video. But if you're not like that, if you just dabble in those things occasionally, if they're hobbies for you and you just want to try it out, trust me, the 8GB version works. So if money is tight and you don't want to spend that additional £200, go for the 8GB version if all you do is normal computer stuff and occasionally dabble in more creative work. If you're running a business and you're looking at this 24-inch M1 iMac as a potential machine to run that business, but you're not keen on investing an additional £200 to get the 16 gig version, again, a little bit like the home users, you've just got to think about what you're going to use it for. And if we use my use case again as an example, I do all of my normal admin, writing, Teams calls, normal stuff that isn't particularly creative, apart from the writing obviously, but all the kind of normal things you do to run a business throughout the day. All of that takes place on this 8 gig base level 24-inch iMac, and it does not sweat at all. And really, as a general office computer, it's overkill. Even with 8 gig, it's just an overkill machine for that, because that M1 chip is so powerful. And if you are a business user, you're probably not that bothered about resale value. I don't think many businesses tend to sell on their old kit, and if anything, they run computers like this into the ground. And because, again, that M1 chip is so powerful, you could run this for quite a few number of years as a general office computer, and it would just breeze through it. However, if your business requires any kind of programming or creative work that either produces stuff that customers buy from you or fuels your marketing strategy, then get the 16 gig. For instance, if I didn't have that 16 gig M1 Mac Mini behind me, I would have got the 16 gig version of the 24-inch iMac. That additional £200, $200 investment will get you back a lot more in terms of longevity, but more importantly, performance. It's just peace of mind, that classic thing. It's just, you'll know that you've got the top spec version, you'll know that you probably can't really max it out, and also you won't experience any bottlenecks in production. If you're doing any kind of creative or development work on these iMacs, then just get the 16 gig. But if it's just gonna be a general office machine, you can save yourself $200 and just get the 8 gig. I wanted to make a very quick note on the fan situation with the 24-inch iMac, because Apple have kept fairly quiet about this. Basically, if you get the base spec version, which is what I've got here, the complete, the cheapest version of the 24-inch iMac, it only comes with one fan inside. And if you look on the schematics that Apple showed us, there were 2 fans. And the reason for that is that they were showing the next model up from the base model, which does have 2 fans. Now, I've actually triggered the fan on my 24-inch iMac, and I've never done that before on the Mac Mini behind me. So this was a first for the M1 chip for me. And it was the most unlikely scenario that kicked that fan in. I'd basically just finished recording a Zoom call, and when you do that, Zoom converts the video and audio into a file that you can use. And as the progress bar was going, I could hear this noise in the background, which I genuinely thought was an aircraft, a distant aircraft somewhere. But it wasn't. It was the 24-inch iMac. The fan had actually come on while it was processing that Zoom call video. I don't know what Zoom does when it exports those calls to video, but it must do some kind of video encoding, and that was enough to kick the fan in on the M1 24-inch iMac. It's also worth noting that it was a very hot day. It was one of the hottest days of the year in the UK when that happened. So I suppose all of that combined, it's not that surprising that the fan came on. That said, if you're one of the general computer users that I mentioned earlier, I wouldn't base your buying decision on the fan. I'd base it on, again, whether or not you can afford or justify that £200, $200 spend to get the 16 gig. But if you're a business user who needs that creative headroom, just make sure you go for the next version up of the iMac, which is the 8-core GPU, not the 7-core GPU. That includes 2 fans. It's just, again, one less thing to worry about, basically. So summing up, based on all of my experience, all of the comments I've received from people, and my experience with this 24-inch iMac that I have in front of me, which is the base spec version, I think it comes down to 3 things. First one being, if you are in any way concerned about not getting the 16 gig version and the £200, $200 difference, you can in some way justify spending that, just do it. Don't think about it. Spend the extra, get the 16 gig. You'll have no buyer's remorse then. If you're a general computer user, you don't want to spend any more money on the base level iMac, and you don't really get involved in really intensive work, and it's not your business, you just want to you just want basically a really, really good home computer for normal home computer use, Same thing for business users as well. If it's just a general office machine, get the 8GB version. It's brilliant. And lastly, if you are a creative user in any way, so if it's something that you rely on for your business or a really intensive hobby that you spend a lot of time on and you can justify that additional spend, get that 16 gig, because again, it's just peace of mind. It's the best thing ever, trust me. I genuinely hope that this video has helped you work out which one to get between the 8GB and 16GB. However, I know it may not have done. You may still have questions. If that's the case, please just get involved in the comments. I'll answer as many of them as I can, and sometimes when I don't answer them, other people do, because it's just such a wonderful community. But if the next thing on your mind is the size of the screen, that 24-inch screen, because at the moment, this is the only M1 iMac you can get. You can't get one with a bigger screen. This bothered me. I thought the 24-inch screen would be too small, because I'm used to big screens like that one behind me and the 27-inch iMac that I had before this. Turns out I didn't need to worry. And to find out why, keep watching for a link to that video. But in the meantime, thank you for watching this one, and I'll catch you next time.